Good afternoon. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fiscal year 20 ACOR grant information webinar. My name is Carla Batts. I'm the Community Investment Specialist at Allegheny Franciscan Ministries, and I work out of our central office in Palm Harbor, which is just located outside of Tampa. We are very excited to have you participate with us today on this webinar and appreciate your interest in learning more about this particular grant program. You should find today's information very helpful as you either are considering moving forward with the application, or maybe you've already started an application and are looking for more guidance on the best way to complete it. But either way, the information you receive today should be very useful. So before we get started with the presentation, I wanted to go over just a few housekeeping items related to our process for Q&A and the recording for the webinar. We will have all of the audio lines muted during the presentation just to cut down on any feedback noise or any background noise. If you have any questions you want to ask during or any questions that you're interested in asking, please submit those in the Q&A box. You should see that at either the top or bottom of your screen around your Zoom window. We ask that you enter those questions there, and then I'll field those questions to the presenter at the end during our designated Q&A time. You also have the option to raise your hand. Your raise your hand feature is available, but we again ask that if you raise your hand, I'll note that, and then we'll come back to you at the designated time at the end of the webinar to answer your questions. At that point, you'll be able to ask your question verbally to the presenter. Again, you can find these features at the top and bottom of your Zoom screen and window. And finally, today's webinar is being recorded. We plan to post the presentation and slides to our website at afmfl.org on the ACOR grants page in the next couple of days. So you'll all have access to those materials at that time and be able to reference the recording there as well. So thanks again for joining us. And now I will turn it over to our presenter and our Director of Grants, Erin Baird.
Thank you, Carla. And welcome, everyone. Can we move to the next slide? I appreciate your interest in learning about the ACOR grant program and your flexibility as we had to reschedule the webinar. So I appreciate you participating today. As Carla mentioned, my name is Erin Baird. I'm the Director of Grants, and I manage the ACOR grant program, so I would be your main contact regarding the ACOR grants. So the agenda for today you can see as follows. We'll start in a minute with a reflection, and then our President and CEO, Eileen Coogan, will provide an organizational overview and talk about our mission and core values and history. And then we'll jump into the ACOR grant program itself, talking about the application process, the guidelines, timeline, and we'll then move to some tips that will be helpful for you as you complete the application. And then finally, we'll have time for question and answers. So next slide. So as I mentioned, we usually start our meetings with a prayer or reflection. As a Catholic organization, we find this meaningful and helps us center ourselves and focus on our broader goals. So I will read the reflection out loud to you, and you can read along silently. Daily we hear the sounds of humanity, shouts of joy and praise and giggles of laughter, words of anger and words of compassion, cries of suffering that usher in death, and cries of pain that deliver new life. The silent sound of tears and smiles. Let the words we speak and the words we hear be marked by honesty and respect for each other and care for those we serve. So now I am pleased to introduce our President and CEO, Eileen Coogan, who's going to share with you some background information about our organization.
Hi, thanks, Erin. And if we could move to the next slide, please, Carla. We thought it might be helpful for you, for those who haven't met us in person, to see the happy smiling faces of our Allegheny Franciscan Ministries team. So the photo on the screen is our group of 9 team members, and we are spread out across the state of Florida, most of us in the Tampa Bay area, but We do have a regional vice president who serves the Miami-Dade community and another regional vice president who serves the Palm Beach, Martin, St. Lucie County area. The two most important people for you to know are Erin Baird, who's presenting on this webinar, and Erin is on the top right, the second person from the right in the back row. And then Carla Batts, who is the second person from the left in the front row. So they are the two who you will probably have the most opportunity to interact with specifically to the ACOR grants. If we could move on to the next slide, Carla, please. So I thought it would be helpful, although I imagine that most people who are applying for an ACOR, interested in an ACOR grant, do have and should have a connection with the Allegheny Franciscan Sisters. But I did want to take a moment to center this grant program, the ACOR grant program, in the history of the sisters and our organization. We were started, Allegheny Franciscan Ministries, a little over 20 years ago. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary. But we really have roots that go back to 1859 when three young girls, really not even women yet, started the Franciscan Sisters of Allegheny in upstate New York to be educators. And they then came to Florida in the late 1920s and early 1930s to provide healthcare ministries, hospitals in Miami, Tampa, West Palm Beach, and St. Petersburg. And in each of those cases, they essentially came to keep a hospital open or open a hospital where there was not access to healthcare for people, particularly disenfranchised and marginalized people in the community. And so we really see ourselves continuing that role now many years later, almost not quite a century later, but a good amount of time later, continuing that role by trying to provide access to healthcare and build healthy communities, particularly in the 6 counties in Florida that the Sisters Hospitals served. We also, as we'll discuss with the ACOR grant program, the ACOR program really does fund beyond those 6 counties, so don't worry about the geographic focus at this point. In 2014, Allegheny Franciscan Ministries, which was then a part of Catholic Health East, together with all the other members of Catholic Health East, merged with Trinity Health. And so we are now a part of the larger national Trinity Health system, which has hospitals and long-term care facilities and other programs and ministries in 22 states around the country. So we're excited to be a part of a much larger system, which is able to really provide significant service and scope and voice to the people that it serves. I want to move on to the one last slide that I have to talk with you about, and then we'll move back to specifically talking about ACOR. Because we are a Catholic organization, because we are really steeped and committed to the tradition and vision of the Franciscan Sisters of Allegheny, and because we are a part of Trinity Health, we have 5 core values that really drive, together with our mission, everything that we do. And so I like to start grant info sessions by sharing just a little bit about our core values so that those of you who are planning to apply for funding can understand what it is that matters to us. And it may help explain why we make some decisions that we make or do some of the things we do. So I'm not going to go into detail about our 5 values. You can see them on the screen, but I do want to comment on a couple of them. And one is stewardship. And stewardship I want to mention because people often think that stewardship is simply about money, and it is. The financial resources that are entrusted to our care are very important, and we do pay attention to how we steward those funds. But we also think about stewardship from a human resource perspective and a natural environmental resource perspective. So we really are looking at our responsibility to steward all the resources that we have been given in the community. And then the other one that I wanted to talk about for a moment is commitment to those who are poor. This is particularly important to us in our grant programs, in that we want the projects that we fund, the organizations that we support, to be really focused on ensuring that people who are marginalized and poor, economically poor or otherwise, have the same access, have the really the justice that everybody else has. And so it's one of the reasons that in some grants, we might not fund a program that is or we would be unlikely to fund a program that is helping everyone in a community, because we really want to target and make sure that those who are poor are particularly helped, those who are more vulnerable at the margins of society. So that was one that I wanted to kind of highlight for you. I'm going to stop there and let you get to the deets, as my son would say, the deets about the ACOR grant program. I'll turn it back over to Erin.
Thank you, Eileen.
You're welcome.
And we're going to start off this section before we move to the next slide, or I guess you can go ahead and move to the next slide, but we're going to do a quick poll of you all just to see your experience with ACOR. So Carla, when you get a chance, can you launch that poll? Simple question, have you received an ACOR grant before, just to get a sense of who's on the phone? Just give you a few more seconds to complete that, and then we'll close the poll and share the results. I think that's good. Carla, if you're not already, can you close the poll and share the results? Oh, wow, even. Good. So there are some new things related to ACOR that I want to share with you, but the question is really, have you received a grant before? So you may, some of the folks that may not have received a grant before have applied before, so you might be familiar with the application process. But I'm glad to have both previous or current grant partners and folks who have not been funded on the call today. Thanks, Carla. So ACOR, as we've alluded to, ACOR is near and dear to our heart here at Allegheny Franciscan Ministries. We've had the ACOR grant program since our beginning, and it really is a unique opportunity to have us work more closely with our founding sponsors, the Franciscan Sisters of Allegheny. I want to start by telling you what ACOR stands for, if you've ever wondered what that means. It actually stands for Allegheny Community Outreach, with outreach broken out into 2 words. So that's what ACOR stands for, so you know. But the focus really is on that outreach component. These programs are in the community beyond a nonprofit organization or an institution that's really trying to bring the community in and to assist the broader community. So as you can see, some of the, just to understand what the purpose and general description of the ACOR grant program is it does provide short-term support, and I'll stop there. There's more to that sentence, but the intent of these grants are that they are short-term in nature. They're not ongoing support or a longer-term commitment that next year that particular project would be funded again. So the intent is program-specific and short-term in nature, given the amount and dollar amount and size of the grant. That phrase you'll see further says that to local community projects that further the mission, vision, and the directions of the Franciscan Sisters of Allegheny. So these grants are intended to bring us back to and support the mission of the sisters. And so you'll see that in the eligibility and guidelines that there's a requirement for an affiliation with the sisters, an associate, or Trinity Health. So the intent is to support their work that they're doing already in community. And an example, or one of the priority criteria, include improving health, wellness, and quality of life of individuals. And so these can take various different forms. So we often don't like to give specific examples because we don't want individuals to feel like they have to have a certain type of project. But some examples of types of projects that we have funded include basic needs such as clothing, shelter, social justice advocacy, literacy, health education, job readiness, environmental education, and Franciscan spirituality. The photo you see here is an example of a recently funded ACOR grant in Haiti with the Religious Congregation of Jesus and Mary. It's a solar panel project for a school that didn't have electricity. So it was really wonderful to be able to provide this type of support to allow or enable electricity in a rural school. So next slide. So the following two slides, this slide and the next slide is guidelines and eligibility information. ACOR grant program has priority criteria that we use to evaluate, and those applications that show or that meet most of these criteria are more likely to be funded. We have a grant committee that makes funding decisions or funding recommendations to our board, and they look at this priority criteria when evaluating grant applications. So we talked briefly about improving health, wellness, and quality of life. It also included a holistic approach to education or direct service. So looking at all the components that would lead to improved health and well-being and quality of life for an individual. So that can take a lot of different forms. Programs that bring about self-sufficiency or systemic change. These are small grants in nature. They're up to $10,000. So that may not always happen with a $10,000 grant, but there are plenty of opportunities, such as the one I just highlighted. Bringing electricity to a school certainly changed a lot of things for people in that village in Haiti. The next criteria, the benefiting people who are disenfranchised, speaks to the core values that Eileen talked about, and a commitment to the core. And definitely is probably the first thing we're really looking at in our grants, for all of our grants for the organization. We really are evaluating, does the project really focus on the disenfranchised and those who don't have other opportunities. We seek to have and support programs that incorporate individuals who are being served in the development of the program. And is there an advisory committee? Are they being asked or evaluated about the project? So we look for that in applications as well. And I mentioned this, it's already focused on the poor and marginalized and the equality of women. And the guidelines this year, we've actually decreased the dollar amount for the ACOR grant amount from $15,000 to $10,000. For years it had been $5,000, many years it had been $5,000 grants. A few years ago we moved it up to $15,000, and we haven't been able to fund as many grants as we have wanted to with the $15,000, and often are having to not fully fund grants to be able to award the full grant budget. So we made the decision this year to decrease the amount to $10,000. The grant period continues to be a one-year grant period. We have some flexibility with that if funds are not spent or if they happen to be spent early. We are open to that, but they're generally 1 year in nature. And the grants have 2 cycles a year. The deadline of October 1st and April 1st every year, with the exception of if it's the weekend and October 1st falls on a Saturday or Sunday, we'll usually change it, or if there is unfortunately a hurricane or another event, we might change it. But the next deadline will be October 1st. So next slide. So there's several criteria that need to be met to be eligible for ACOR. We often have a lot of interest in ACOR, but there really is a specific group that it's targeted towards, and so not everyone is eligible. Eileen mentioned earlier the communities and regions where we serve in Florida and the counties. There is no geographic restriction for ACOR grants. In fact, we have sisters serving in Jamaica, Bolivia, and Brazil, and so many grants go to help those communities. But you do need to be a 501c3 organization, I don't believe there's anyone on the call, or I don't know if there's someone on the call that is serving in Bolivia, Brazil, or if you might be helping one of the sisters or associates in those communities. Feel free to contact me, and we do provide some accommodations to those in Brazil and Bolivia for that grant application so that they can complete it in their language. So I can work with you on that. We do have some documents in Portuguese on the website and on our online grant application system. You need to be current with your progress reports for any past grants or active grants. So if you, what is considered active grant, if you have not submitted your final report for a current grant or have a previous grant that you never submitted a report for, would make you ineligible to apply. You just need to submit the report, reach out, and we can get that report submitted, and you can be eligible again. I will contact you if that is the case. Often someone will submit a grant application not aware that they had a report due, so I will reach out to you if that's the case. Of course, you need to comply with the terms of our grant agreement. We have a grant agreement for all of our grants that we award here. And finally, the project must be affiliated with the Franciscan Sisters of Allegheny, their associates, or have a direct affiliation with Trinity Health. So this is the most frequent question I often get asked, especially in the 6 communities or 3 regions that we serve. So there often is asking for a connection with the Sisters of Allegheny. And as I mentioned before, the intent is really to support and further the work that they're already doing in the community. So if you don't have such a relationship, I'm not the person to facilitate that for you. But that is a requirement for the grant program. Each applicant can get no more than one ACOR grant a year. We have 2 cycles, as I mentioned, and you can submit 1 application per cycle and not be awarded more than 1 grant per year. And the next limitation is similar to the eligibility about if you have an active grant, we wouldn't move a new application forward. We wouldn't accept it. So you need to wait until the current grant is completed before applying again. We don't award grants for individuals, public agencies, individual scholarships, fundraising events, endowments. And then we do ask that you limit your funding requested for personnel. And really this is, I don't have a specific amount, this is a general guideline that for the grant amount is up to $10,000. We ask that you don't ask for the full $10,000 for one individual salary. And the intent is this is short-term funding. If the if you're requesting or looking, if you don't get funding from another source for that next year, we don't want that person's position at risk, or we don't want to be fully funding one person's position. $10,000 isn't a lot of money, but if it's program specific, and we really ask that you consider not requesting or full funding for personnel costs. So next slide. So I wanted to give you a specific example. I gave some general examples a couple slides ago, but a specific example of a project we funded. Last year, I think I gave an example of a project based in the United States. This year, this project is based in Brazil. The sisters have a significant presence in Brazil, and this is a particular project that was supported recently in Brazil that really speaks to what we're trying to do through ACOR and support, create some strategic change and some significant change for individuals. So the project was around biodigesters, which is an agroecology technology project in the area of Bahia, Brazil. And the grant was used to train and build 13 biodigesters on 13 individual families' property. It uses, these are farming communities, and it uses manure for biogas to create biogas, which is then used for cooking fuel, and that manure is also can be reused for farming. So it's a win-win. It has a purpose that the families can use, and then it can also be used to continue farming. Really like the components of that. Local individuals and masons were trained on how to build the biodigesters, so they built them, and they're able to service and fix them if need be. And it empowered these 13 families. Also received education about agroecology and the importance of having good ecological technology for farming and for fuel resource. So this project was overseen by a Franciscan Sister of Allegheny, and that's the affiliation connection, which I'll speak about in a minute. That's part of the application process. So next slide. So how to apply. Hopefully by this point you're interested in applying and meet all the criteria. So to apply for the grants, we use an online grant application. As I mentioned earlier, we do make accommodations if you are helping one of the sisters or associates overseas in a different language. And I'll show you that in a minute. But the majority of applicants, we use the online grant application, which can be found on our website at afmfl.org. Let me use my pointer. Hopefully you can see this. And then to the far right, there's a login menu, a drop-down menu. From that menu, you would look for, there's two kind of login-related sub-menus, and so you want the grant applicant, grant partner login link. So next slide. So once you click on that link, you'll be taken to this, which is known as the login page for all of our grant programs. It's a separate website, if you will. It's a whole separate software that we use to manage our grants. And so it has our applications, progress reports, grant agreements. All that information is housed in this software. So if you have never applied with us before, you would need to click on the Create a New Account and go through the steps. That's going to ask you for a lot of background information to create a new account and create a password, and then you will be able to access the application. There's also some resources here to the right in this gray box that says if you're a first-time user and if you've been here before, here's some information about how to use the software. We also recommend, and actually the software provider recommends that we use Google Chrome. It is the preferred browser, and you may have problems if you're not using Google Chrome. So we ask that you install Google Chrome. If you don't have it, there's a link here in this gray box to install it on your computer. If you have an email address, you've applied already, click on, go ahead and log in using your email address and password. If you think you have an email address, if not, you can click on the Forgot Password and you will receive a link to reset it. If you have any questions or concerns, you can always contact us. There will be a slide at the end. If you don't want to create a duplicate organization, you can contact us and we can look up and see if you are already a user in the system. Next slide. So once you've logged in, you've either created an account or you've logged in with your credentials. These are across the top of your screen. You will see the different pages that you're able to access. And the apply page, I'm not quite sure which one it defaults to. It depends on which status, if you have an active grant or not, if you're new. But you'll want to be on the apply page. So you'll click on that apply link at the top, and this apply page will pop up. And these are all the active grant applications we have available at this time. And so you'll see the ACOR, they're in alphabetical order. ACOR, you'll see is the first application. And there is an overview document in English and in Portuguese here. there's the actual application questions in Portuguese. So you still had to get through the login process to be able to access the Portuguese questions, but I can also email you them if needed. You can select the preview button to print out a PDF of the questions and work on your answers in a Word document. We prefer that, or we ask you to do that so that you it'll may make the process easier for you, at least some of the questions that might be a little bit longer. And to actually apply itself, you would click on the Apply button on the right-hand side. Let's go to the next slide. So I didn't want to pull up the whole application for you. It's actually not too long, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of the questions that we, as a grant committee, really look closely at, and often at times don't have all the information that we would like to have. So I just wanted to highlight those for you. So the first one's speaking to the need. Why is the project needed, and how did you determine this need? Please take a moment to really explain the need for the project in particular. A lot of times we'll get, for this question, the next question, we'll get information about the organization itself, but think about the project that you're hoping to get funded, and talk to us about what the need is and how you came up with that need, and assume that we don't understand and are familiar with the work that you're doing. Secondly, describing the project or initiative and providing details about what you hope to accomplish. Again, this is really the heart of the project. Description, so take the time and put some detailed information. Again, don't speak solely about the organization, but more specifically about the project too, which is really what you're requesting funding for. It should also match with the narrative piece of your budget about what you're requesting funding for. We should be able to see a similarity between what you're talking about in the project description and described in the project budget section of the grant application. And then finally, as we increase the dollar amount over the years from $5,000 to $15,000 and now $10,000, 10 is still a significant amount of money, and our committee is very interested in learning about the results of the project, specifically because we often get requests for funding the same project over and over. So it's very important to the decision makers to know what's been going on with the project, what have been the successes and what have been the challenges, and how you plan on knowing that it's a success. So for this part, have you thought about how are you going to know if this project is successful? What are you going to do starting at the beginning before the project is implemented to be able to know that it is indeed a success? So we'd like to begin with thinking about the end in mind and thinking about how you're going to think about measuring the success. Here's just an example of another project. This is one in Bolivia that we've supported school lunches for community and a rural community in Bolivia. Next slide. So within the application there is one upload document, and this is may be a challenge at times. So you need to download this document within the application, have it completed, and then re-upload it. And this speaks to the affiliation. And we added this years ago because we're not aware of all the relationships, of all the sisters and the associates with nonprofits and the work that they're doing in community. So this gives an opportunity for the sister or the associate or Trinity Health, which is easier for us to identify what the relationship is. So we're really looking for the sister or an associate to be actively involved as a volunteer, a staff member, a trustee, involved in the organization, and ideally the project. And for Trinity Health applicants, they really just need to describe what their legal relationship is with the organization. So sometimes there are nonprofits associated with the health system, so they need to identify that. A leader within Journey Health should be completing that for them. So there's a section at the top where you identify your affiliation, and then there's a question or two where you can put more information, and needs to be signed and dated and returned. So if there's questions about this, feel free to ask me. Make sure you allow enough time, because this document needs to be sent off to the sister. In some cases, it may be the sister that's completing the application or associate, but if not, you need to allow time to have the affiliation form sent to someone to complete and then re-upload it all before the deadline. I wanted to make you aware of that and what it looked like. So next slide, sorry. So the timeline for ACOR grants, we have 2 grant cycles a year. We have the fall and spring. So like I mentioned, October 1st and April 1st. We anticipate making decisions in November and May. We're trying right now to schedule our meeting, and it's looking like it's going to be mid-November. So the decisions probably won't be until late November, which is going to be close around Thanksgiving time, I'm assuming. And then in the spring cycle will be mid to late May as well. Next slide. So a couple tips to help you, hopefully, as you prepare for writing a grant application. If you received, if you were declined in the past, please reach out for feedback from me. Just call and schedule a time, or shoot me an email and send me we can schedule a time to talk about it if we haven't already. Many people, if their grant application is declined, will reach out right away, and I try to provide feedback. That's the best time because it's most fresh on my mind, and take notes during the meeting so that we can provide that feedback. We don't want you to keep applying if the committee is not interested in funding a particular portion of that project or has some concerns. So I want to be able to share that with you. I mentioned earlier about taking time to put your answers in a Word document, and then you can cut and paste them into the grant application. The grant application system allows you to, complete one question, save it, and come back to it and finish it. So you by no means have to do that, but many people find it helpful to use a Word document to put their information in there, and then just cut and paste it and put it into the grant application. So recommend that you try that approach. There's a question in the application I didn't share, and I was kind of talking about that before with the evaluation. If there's a question now that speaks more to what are the results if it's a current or expansion project. If you're wanting to fund something that you're currently doing now, it's not a new project. It's either something we have funded or not, maybe not have funded, but you have some results or some data to share about the success of that project. We're very interested in that. We mentioned we have a lot of the same applicants each time, so we want to know, was that last grant that we awarded successful? There is a progress report that's required and is completed, but we would like you in the grant application to comment on what happened with that last grant. So please do so. That really helps build the case for your project and would be very helpful to us. In the grant application, there is a section where you will ask for the total amount requested from Allegheny Franciscan Ministries, and then there's a section where we have categories broken down by program budget. Those individual categories should add up to that total requested amount. There is a separate question that asks the total project cost. The total project cost may differ from what you're requesting from us. Hopefully it does, probably. But the individual budget category should add up to the total requested amount. So please look at that and ask me if you have any questions about that. Oftentimes people don't include the funding sources. So we really encourage you to do that. Consider in-kind sources, any fundraisers. If you're not getting other grant funding sources, who have you asked for funding for this project. We are interested in knowing that you are looking at other sources of funding as well, and that can have a lot of different. They may not all be grants. It may be individual donations. It might be a fundraiser. It might be in kind. It might be your organization itself that's contributing financial resources. So please include that. Allow time, like I just mentioned, for the affiliation form. It does take time. You need to download it, share it with someone. They need to complete it. It needs to be re-uploaded. So please allow enough time for that to happen. And then finally, submit your application early. If there's anything wrong with the application, those budget numbers don't add up, I might be able to spot it early, and we might be able to fix it. If you turn it in the last day, it's submitted as is, and I really can't do anything about it. So please take time and try to submit your grant application early. So next slide. So there are several resources for you to use as you complete your grant application. These are links, and these slides will be posted on our website, so you can actually click on these links. So you can look at these later. The first one is how to use our online grant application system. We made a one-page document to help troubleshoot creating a new account and accessing your application. So this document is posted several places on our website, but it's a great resource for you if you get stuck. You can also feel free to call our office. Anyone who picks up the phone will probably be able to help you complete this. Although Carla, we mentioned Carla earlier, would be an excellent person to be able to help with this as well. There's grant writing tips we've learned over the years through our different grant programs. There's certain tips that are helpful and that we suggest to consider when completing a grant application. And so there's a one-page document on our website that has this information. Actually, most of these first three links are under our resources tab on our website. There's a grant writing or grant resources section on there, and you'll find all these links there as well. We have grant FAQs. So there's some good information there about applying for a grant once a grant's awarded, some organizational information. So please, if you have questions, go through them and check that out. And then finally, there is a page on our website called Grants Awarded, and we have all of our grants for, I believe, the last 3 or 4 years. So we'll have our ACOR grants for the last 3 or 4 years on the website, listed by alphabetically, international, and then U.S.-based ones, and a brief summary of what that grant program was about. So I encourage you to take a look at those and learn more about what we've been funding. So I think, let's go to the next slide. I think that might be it. Yep. So I asked Carla, I don't know if anyone's asked any questions. This is a time to ask any questions you might have. If I didn't answer them in the presentation, I'm happy to do so. My contact information is here. You can email me or call me anytime.
Erin, this is Carla. Yes. I do actually have a couple questions that came in for you.
Okay, great.
One is, how, and I know you mentioned this before, but I think it's always good to kind of go back and reiterate just to make sure that's clear. How can organizations become affiliated?
Okay. Yes. So we don't facilitate that connection. I think the sisters are involved in several enough projects as it is. I don't want to extend individual affiliations. And the intent of this grant program itself is really to support the sisters in the work that they're doing. So I don't facilitate a connection or make an affiliation. It's intended to support the sisters where they are. So we have some in the 3 regions where we serve that are working at hospitals and in nonprofits and different capacities. And we have, like I said, we have 3 different groups. So we have the sisters, their associates, which are lay people that are affiliated with the Franciscan Sisters of Allegheny. And those even extend beyond, they extend beyond our 3 regions in Florida where we serve, but they extend throughout the U.S. and internationally as well, and then Trinity Health. So those are the three affiliation types you must have to be eligible for this type of application. If you don't have those affiliations, unfortunately, I'm not able to make them for you. So hopefully that answers your question.
Great, Erin. Yeah, no, I think that was really helpful with those exact details, just so it's more clear. I do have another question, and it asks, does the budget allow for a percentage of administrative costs?
We ask that you incorporate that into the categories. So there's different categories, and I have an application here. So there's personnel, supplies and equipment, food, purchase services, and other costs. So if nothing fit into those other specific categories, you could put them in other costs. But we ask that you break down those costs for us and include them in the budget.
Okay, great, thank you. Wanted to give just another quick minute to see if anyone else had a question they wanted to submit either in the Q&A box or the chat box, and or if you wanted to raise your hand and ask a question verbally. Okay, Erin.
And I just wanted to mention that at the bottom of the screen you'll see that we have Facebook and LinkedIn accounts. We ask if you want to apply for or complete an interview. We don't know who you still say to be as honest as possible. We're grant within with the last year, you did receive a from Robertson Consulting. So please take a moment to complete that survey. It's actually an survey, so you have applied, or it's October 1st at 12 noon. We try to get all those grants in as soon as possible, so they're not coming in late at night. But again, if you are applying or helping someone apply that is in Brazil or Bolivia and need assistance with translation, please reach out to me and I can work with you. So I think that's all I have. Anyone, Carla or Eileen?
I don't believe. I was just checking to see if anyone. But I think we have. Yep, I believe we've covered all the questions. But no, I think that's everything, Erin. We can go ahead and close out now with contact information and everything that Erin just mentioned. Again, like us on Facebook or on LinkedIn, or review us on grantadvisor.org. We welcome your input and feedback there on the application process. So I think that's everything for today, Erin, unless there's any last thing you'd want to add.
Nope, that's all I have. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to you. Since we had to move the webinar back, the deadline still is October 1st, so allow time to go ahead and get started with that if you haven't started already. And reach out with any questions.
Great, thanks.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.